I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm so thrilled to be joined by the wonderful Clive Owen, who plays the role of Samuel Spade and is an executive producer on the series Monsieur Spade. And starting off, I wanted to talk about obviously, you came into this show as a huge fan of the character, a huge fan of the Maltese Falcon. I know that you even had a poster in your home already, and Humphrey Bogart's work. And I was really interested in how you answered the question for yourself of how much do I want to lean into the iconography that people are already familiar with, and re-immersing myself with all of that work and the character that already exists, and how much do I want to create a very different space, because obviously we're taking the character forward several years into a completely different story in a completely different setting. And I think you've done a really beautiful job at capturing both of those spaces in your performance.
It's yeah, I mean, it's a good question because it was kind of both really. It wasn't, I didn't have this strong instinct of, oh, I need to put my mark on it. I need to come in and reinvent this whole thing. I was such a fan of the original source material. I'm a big Bogart fan. I'm a big fan of the Dashiell Hammett book. I'm a big fan of noir. So it was kind of both. Scott did a lot of the work of the reimagining by setting it 20 years in ahead of the book, living in a completely new environment. The fact that I'm living in the south of France already, it makes the noir thing very different because the environment is so different. And so I was not like I wasn't nervous about leaning in because it felt to me we're setting up a new world. We're setting up a new world for Spade, but I still wanted the origins of the guy. I wanted you to feel that this guy 20 odd years ago was a private detective in San Francisco, and I wanted to track that through as well. So and many years ago I was attached with a studio and had the rights to play Chandler's Marlowe, and I know it's a very difficult thing noir in some ways because we're so familiar with it, and when you do all the classic things, people get so familiar so quickly and think, oh, I know what this is. I know what noir is. I know what that. And so the reimagining it and putting it into the south of France was a very clever idea, I think, in terms of a fresh approach.
I agree. And I love that one of the ways in which you stepped into the character for yourself was in really using the dialogue of Humphrey Bogart and recording just the audio from his movies and his performances and just listening to that on repeat to really find the specific sense of speed, because it's a very kind of restrained character, but with a lot of speed to the dialogue. And so how did you come up with the idea of like taking that audio, and how did that really help you in finessing the way that you wanted to deliver it?
I think because again, we're shooting in the south of France primarily with French actors, and I thought I'm English, playing American, speaking some French, so I needed a grounding for myself. If we were shooting in the States and everybody, I would feel like we would all find that thing together. But I felt a little alone in terms of like grounding it in that original thing. So I needed something vocal, an audio, you don't have to push me to drink in Humphrey Bogart's films. You know what I mean? Like so I just saw it as this great opportunity. Oh, I have to do this. It's for this gig, and I did that, and I lent in, and I really looked at him, and I lifted all of just his dialogue from both the Maltese Falcon and Casablanca. Nobody else speaking, just his dialogue. Lifted it out, put it on one audio file, and that was kind of my grounding every day. I put it in, I'd listen to it, and it would just set me and ground me for the day's work.
And I think the idea of having those two spaces of a really speedy delivery of dialogue when there's longer monologues, and also a character that very much also holds himself back and keeps himself quite still and stoic a lot of the times, is such an interesting space to create when it coexists side by side. And so how did you set about making sure that you were having both of those things in sync with one another?
Well, that it really came from like looking, thinking about Bogart. And then I called Scott and I said, one thing I've discovered is whenever he has, any reasonable size chunk of dialogue, he's really fast. We think of him as laconic, easy, laid back. Actually, he's super nimble. He's very dexterous with his language. And, you can tell that, he did theater and stuff because he shapes and really sort of works a whole speech, but then flies through it. And I think one of the things that I love about him as an actor, and I would argue you could throw him in a film tomorrow and he'd be believable. Like some actors, they don't, they won't stand that test of time. It'd be mannered, it would be a style of acting that maybe has changed. But Bogart would be believable if he rocked up in something tomorrow. But it was really, I said to Scott, what what is really interesting is he never milks anything. He never overindulges. He never over emotes. If the dialogue is there and the dialogue's great and the dialogue has good rhythm, you kind of just let it do the work and you rip through it and you don't take too much time. I mean, the whole the whole thing of Spade is that he's very, very contained, and we know he has emotions, but they're very, very held. He doesn't over exclaim. He's not. That's not what those classic iconic characters are. They keep things very, very tight, and so that's what I concentrated on really.
Yeah. And that's such a great point about these aren't characters that are overly emotive. And, where your version of the character is in a space where he lost his wife and he had this really beautiful relationship where he was incredibly close to her. And it's not something where he's discussing that sense of loss with other characters or confiding in anybody about how he feels, but it carries throughout the entire series. And so,
Right.
how did you find the approach for how is he going to carry this sense of loss and this connection to memory when it's not a verbal expression?
Well, I'm hugely helped by Scott and his writing because he places that throughout. There are moments where we know he's feeling deeply about the loss of her. So that there is it's just hugely important. If you've got Scott Franks is such a top writer, and when you've got writing that good and the rhythms are good, and as you say, the moments where we see that he's really feeling and really grieving, if the structure and the shape is there for you, it's like getting in a great car and driving it. Like, don't play with the rhythm. It's there. It's set up for you. That's where we're going to see that. And the one thing about Scott and his directing is the clarity of intent, the clarity of the storytelling is so good. It's like we're really clear where we are and what we're supposed to think. That's not always the case. Sometimes, intentions are really muddied when we watch things. We watch things and think, oh, what was that? But with Scott, it's really super clear. And it's really about trusting the writing.
Right. And one of the scenes that we kind of see in different iterations is the moments where he goes into the swimming pool because that's a space that he shared with his wife. And so those scenes feel really pivotal in terms of that as well. And so how did you want to go into each of those moments as this is kind of a really sacred space where he's kind of communing with the memory of her?
That was about going to the gym. Scott told me before he even showed me a script that he'd had this idea of this recurring theme. So I was given plenty of warning to get my stuff together. But yeah, that was like and again, what's really lovely is we have this duality because I'm passionate about the source material and the world where Spade comes from. And Scott was doing this very clever sort of playing with the whole genre of the macho thing, of the smoking, of all the tropes that we know with those characters, making them older and seeing how we can play with that as a thing. But what is lovely is it's both. It's a reinvention and a real homage to the period, because for me there would be nothing worse than if we start to open up Sam Spade and get to him to talk about his feelings. That seems to me a million miles away from what the character and what the source material is.
I also love kind of the very dry wit to him as a character, and there's like a little bit of exhaustion with it. There's times where other people try to engage in humor with him, and he's just not having it. But then at the same time, there's a moment where a priest says he's from New York, and Spade's like, "My condolences." And so, how did you want the sense of humor that he has to really speak about him as well?
Again, that's all about, I think, sort of, speed of thought of like trusting and that the rhythms are good. And Scott wrote those great rhythms, and the wit is important. You don't want it to be earnest and overwrought and everything serious. Those characters, those classic noir characters, they are dry. They are very funny.
And I wanted to talk a little bit about his relationship with Teresa, who, in essence, is a young girl that he's asked to deliver to her father. But then when he's not able to do that, he puts her in a convent, but like continues to show up for her. And it evolves really beautifully throughout the series. But at the beginning, how did you find what you wanted that relationship to look like? Because it's not necessarily parental, but he is kind of the only male figure that she's had in her life. And they're not close. They don't really know each other, but there is some sort of connection that keeps pulling them back to one another.
Well, in some ways, it's sort of that completely appeals, and it's probably why I like this genre and why I was so excited to play Spade is that it's not sentimental. And here we have a relationship with this young girl, and I'm pretty tough on her, and she's a pretty tough thing as well. And then you go, but really, you know that there's feeling, you know that, but it's just not overexpressed. It's not. So you can play the two things all the time. You can play that deep down, I do care about this girl, but on the surface, everything is tough and like, and I love playing the duality of that and letting you in without making it really obvious and over explained.
There's also a great character moment for Spade at the beginning of the series when she comes to him and says, I need your help. And she just immediately physically grabs him and embraces him. And you're kind of standing there, like not fully returning it with your arms kind of outside, like, I don't really know how to respond to this because this isn't how I engage with people. And so, what gave you that idea of like, I really don't think that he would go fully back in for it with her?
I think it's all to do with that instinct of like, the lack of emotion, the lack of like when somebody comes at him with a flood of emotion or need, that he has to sort of hold his thing together really. So, and I think that's very, very Spade-like. And it's not that he's unfeeling. It's just that, he's a character that this is how he behaves. And what it means is when he does express, or show that he cares about something, it resonates. It really matters.
Yeah, and it feels like his way of expression is very much through actions instead of words, because there's a moment where we see him worried that she's okay, and just the way that he races through the house to kind of check that she's all right in her bedroom, and then he
Exactly.
sees her sleeping. And so, do you very much see him as like a character where actions create a lot of emotional expressions as well?
Well, you have to ask yourself why, someone like Sam Spade or someone like, Shanda's Marlowe, why are they still around? Why do they still resonate? And it has to be the fact that they have a strong moral compass. And the thing about Spade, we join him. He's trying to live the quiet life. He's grieving. He wants to be quiet. He wants to sort of, just be on his own and have some quiet time. But if he sees something that is very wrong, he's got to act. He's got to do something about it. He has a moral, he cannot just walk away. And I think that's a big part of why these characters are still around and why we still sort of warm to them, because there's nothing better than someone who is trying to do the right thing and will go to whatever lengths to do that.
I completely agree. And also one of the reasons that these characters resonate is, he doesn't have the internet and he doesn't have a wealth of technology to figure out what's going on. It's very much just gut instinct and what people reveal of themselves in front of him in conversation. And so how did you want to set about creating that real observational quality to a character that just has to try and be very keyed into everything around him?
Well, that was a really great note from Scott when we first started working on it. He said, just remember that Spade's always one step ahead. So in all the scenes, as you're engaging with these people, they reveal themselves. You keep quiet, but you're sort of on top. Like play everything like you're just that one step ahead. And it was a very good note because it just means the quality of listening is even different. You're not sort of going and tracking things. It's as if you already have an overview. It's as if you've already got there, but you're just letting people reveal stuff to you.
Yeah. And he is very much one step ahead of people, but there's also moments where he hasn't quite clocked onto people and he hasn't quite clocked onto information because it's been a few years since he's been so immersed in
That
this.
is rusty.
Yeah. So how did you set about figuring out where does it kind of fit like a glove in stepping back into this previous version of himself, and where do I want the cracks to exist?
Well, I think again, that's, that I'm helped enormously by the writing and by the way Scott wrote it. He is older, he is jaded, he's not as fit. He gets pulled into it and he might if he has to get physical or if he has to do, he has to sort of drag himself into it a little bit. It doesn't come as easily as it might have done 20 odd years ago. So that is something that we play with throughout the whole show, that yes, Sam Spade is older.
He's a little bit tired.
Yeah.
I mean, because the very beginning of the show obviously opens in that scene with the doctor where he's getting the prostate exam, but then he's being told, you need to stop smoking because of your lungs, and that is played into effect. Like there's a moment where we see him chasing someone and he's just physically bent over trying to gasp for breath.
Yeah.
And so, how did you want that sense of even just breathlessness to be part of it?
That was, yeah, we Scott had tracked that in as a running thing, that he's just not, when it comes to the physical thing, he's going to do it, but he's just not quite the guy he was. And it's a great start because you think of Spade and you think of the hat, the gun, and the cigarette, and suddenly first opening scene, he's been told he's got to give up, that the smoking's taken its toll.
And you were mentioning, like, obviously there are a couple moments where he is using violence as a tool, but those scenes aren't about the violence. It's still, again, very much character beats back and forth. There's a scene where he's interrogating someone and there are physical altercations within that scene, but it's also him very much using his like wit and his intelligence in it. And so how did you make sure that it was leaning forward into that side of things versus being focused on the violent
Yeah,
aspect of it?
no, I think Scott was not interested in violence for violence sake. When there is violence, I mean, I always seized it as an opportunity, to a little window into what Spade might have been like back in the day. That was my opportunity. I go, oh, this is. I had a running gag with Scott throughout the whole shooting, which was, I've been duped. You told me I was playing Sam Spade. I don't get the hat. I don't get a gun. I don't smoke. I don't hit anybody. Like, what is this? And but that when he gave me those opportunities that I felt had a real flavor of what maybe the old Sam Spade was like, I have to admit, I relish them.
I mean, you were touching upon a little bit earlier, that sense of it's not a noir in the same way that the Maltese Falcon is a noir from that particular time period, but there are aspects that carry through. And I was interested in if that kind of was at the back of your mind, if it was helpful to think about that tonally a little bit of, it's kind of a film noir character out of water to a degree, or if it was better just to kind of not think about that in terms of tone and
Thought about it
performance.
all the time, only because I love the genre. So I thought about it all the time. I wanted to track back. Yes, we're doing a reinvention, but I'm not going to go in and go and sort of ignore that source material. I love it too much. And I want to track that. Yes, we're going to see all the differences. We're going to see him in a new environment. We're going to see him like not quite the same guy that he was, but I want to feel that he came from that.
Yeah. I also like that he kind of embellishes his prickliness. When Teresa calls him an asshole, he's like, it's nothing I've never heard before. And he kind of again just like leans into it. It's not insult. He doesn't pull back when people say that, he embraces it. And so how was that a central part of him for you as well?
But that's another indication of somebody who's not exclaiming, that it's very hard to get into someone like Sam Spade, because he brushes it off. He'll have, the great thing about, you go back and watch movies of that time, is the speed and wit of the dialogue. Somebody says somebody says something smart, straight back at them. And in some ways, we've lost that. And you go back and look at some of the cool older films. One film that I've always adored, primarily for the dialogue, is Sweet Smell of Success. And you watch that movie, and within 5 minutes, it's a joy, because everything somebody says, somebody tops with something sharper and wittier. And the film just rips through with this really great dialogue. And when you've got that to play with, it's a real treat.
I also love the detail in the location in the show, where the original location for Spade's place, where it fell through and you actually offered, hey, like, why don't you considering the place that production have rented for me to live in while we're filming? And so then you have this very meta experience of playing a character who was living a very peaceful, tranquil life that's been interrupted, and you're now in the position of everybody is on set at your location where you're sleeping
How
at
did you
five
know
o'clock in
that?
the
How
morning.
did you know that about the house? Because
The internet's a great thing.
so no, it wasn't that I offered it at all. What
Oh,
happened is that Scott came over to do some work on the script and went, this place is amazing. Went for a walk, saw the pool, saw the vineyard, went, oh my God. And then went, this is actually better than the location. It's got everything I need. And suddenly I was getting these mysterious bangs on the trailer door, like, yeah, the art department would like to go and see your house. I'm like, why? And they go, inspiration. Like, and I was like, okay. Next minute, it's like 10 crew people turning up after work. And I'm like, now I'm smelling a rat. Then I get the knock saying, any chance we can come and shoot your house? So yeah, it was ironic.
There you go. We're correcting the record before it gets too far out there.
Yeah, it wasn't my choice.
I also wanted to ask you about the way in which you approach scene analysis, because when you were working on A Murder at the End of the World, like Britt Marling was talking about how when she would be going through a scene with you, that the level of analysis that you would have would be the same that it would take to write a scene in essence. And so I was just very interested in how you work with scripts and how you really break down all of the details within a scene as an actor.
I'm not like I can't write, I can't create, but I think I'm pretty good at notes, and I've worked with a lot of directors who would say that. I have, I always look at things. I don't look at it from like my own character's point of view. It's not about ego. It's not about, oh, I want my scenes to be better. I look at the whole thing. I look at where I sit in it, and then I'm a bit of a logic monster. And I think even in the most fantastical, like crazy thing, you kind of have to have a set of rules, and the logic has to be solid. You need to track, especially. I'm looking at it from an actor's point of view, and I've read some scripts by some very big writers that are very highly thought of. And I think they're slight tricksters because the scenes are very cute and they're very well done and it's enjoyable, but it's really hard to play and to track. You go, I don't know how I get from there to there. I don't know how I get from there. It's great, and they're great. They're done with wit and verve, but they're not based in. I can't see the real way through. I go, well, that doesn't track. That guy who did that wouldn't do that or that. So I'm very, very logical. And I remember on Murder at the End of the World, we had, I think, once a 4-hour Zoom, and it was just talking through the whole. And I just had questions, not always about my part in it, but just saying to the guys, so with this there, why would that do that? How would that? And we would just do that. And again, it's not about me trying to build up or shape just what I'm doing. It's just literally being quite rigorous with how the thing, if there are any holes, if there is something that somebody would say, that wouldn't happen because of that. And I'm pretty good at tracking things in that way.
I love that. And I enjoyed your performance in this series so much, but I love that you basically seem to be living the dream and playing your ideal character in it. So it's been so fascinating to hear everything that went into it. Thank you so much, Clive.
Thank you. Take care.